It started like any other day at the upscale shopping mall, a bustling hub of fashion, luxury, and expectations. In the center of it all, a well-dressed store manager stood behind her counter, meticulously watching the entrance. Her gaze locked on a man who had just walked in. He wasn't flashy, but there was something about him that made her pause. Maybe it was his casual clothes, his confident stride, or the fact that he didn't seem like the usual customer she expected to see. The man, unaware of her scrutiny, moved from aisle to aisle, calmly browsing. But the manager's suspicions grew with every passing moment. She whispered to her staff, pointing him out with an unmistakable air of distrust. Minutes later, 2 uniformed police officers entered the store. Their presence immediately drew attention, customers glancing nervously, some pulling out their phones to record. The officers approached the man, their expressions unreadable. The manager's smirk widened as she watched from the sidelines, arms crossed, convinced she had everything under control. But then, something unexpected happened. The man, calm and collected, met the officer's gaze and said 6 words that changed everything. "Call the mall owner. Now." Her smirk disappeared, replaced by confusion. The other customers froze, their curiosity turning into stunned silence. What unfolded next was a turn of events no one could have predicted. Stay with us as we unravel the story of how a moment of prejudice led to a shocking revelation, one that left an entire mall in disbelief and changed the lives of everyone involved. Before we go deeper into this story, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're ready to uncover the unexpected twist that left everyone speechless, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's about to happen. To understand the weight of what happened that day, you first need to know the man at the center of it all. His name was Malcolm Bennett, a man whose name was respected in circles far beyond what anyone in that store could have imagined. Malcolm was more than just a customer that day. He was a story of resilience, determination, and quiet strength. Born in a modest neighborhood, Malcolm grew up facing challenges most people would find insurmountable. His parents worked tirelessly to give him and his siblings opportunities, but the barriers were always there. School wasn't just about learning, it was about proving he belonged. Jobs weren't just about earning, they were about pushing past assumptions. Yet, with every closed door, Malcolm found another way forward. By his late 20s, Malcolm had done more than survive. He thrived. A natural entrepreneur, he built a small tech company from the ground up. By his 40s, that company had grown into an empire, with investments in real estate, technology, and yes, shopping malls. Despite his wealth, Malcolm remained grounded. He was known for giving back to the very communities that helped shape him, funding scholarships, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and ensuring that others had a chance to succeed. But if you saw Malcolm that day in the store, you wouldn't have known any of that. He wasn't dressed to impress. There were no expensive suits or flashy accessories, just a man in comfortable clothes browsing the aisles. To the store manager, Linda, he was just another face, a face she had already decided didn't belong there. Linda, on the other hand, carried herself with an air of superiority. She was the kind of manager who took pride in her authority, often using it to make snap judgments about the people who walked through her doors. For her, running this high-end store wasn't just a job, it was a stage. And in her eyes, every customer played a role. Some welcome, others not. That day, when Malcolm walked in, Linda didn't see a successful businessman or a philanthropist. She saw what she wanted to see. She whispered to her staff, her words laced with assumptions. She positioned herself near the counter, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of what she deemed trouble. What Linda didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Malcolm wasn't just there to shop. He was there with a purpose, and that purpose would soon turn her world upside down. Malcolm entered the store with a calm demeanor, his steps steady, his attention focused. He wasn't in a rush. This wasn't just a casual visit. He had come to look at something specific, something he intended to purchase. As he walked through the aisles, his eyes scanned the carefully curated displays. It was a store that prided itself on exclusivity, a place where luxury was the norm and expectations were high. Linda, the manager, noticed him almost immediately. From her position behind the counter, she stiffened, her expression sharpening as she followed his movements. It wasn't curiosity that drove her attention. It was suspicion. She leaned toward a nearby employee, her voice low but pointed. "Keep an eye on him," she said, gesturing subtly in Malcolm's direction. The employee hesitated, glancing toward Malcolm, who was examining a display with quiet interest. "Are you sure?" the employee asked cautiously. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, her tone firm. "I've seen this before. He doesn't belong here. He's probably scoping the place out." The employee said nothing more, but the discomfort was clear. They followed Linda's instructions, trailing Malcolm from a distance, watching his every move. Malcolm, meanwhile, remained unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, about the growing scrutiny. He picked up an item, inspecting it carefully, before moving on to another section of the store. He didn't rush, didn't fidget, didn't show any signs of unease. But 55S only deepened. Each moment that passed seemed to amplify her resolve. She walked back to her counter, her hands gripping the phone tightly. With one quick motion, she began dialing. "This is Linda, store manager at Lux Couture," she said when the call connected. Her voice was sharp, deliberate. "We've got someone acting suspiciously in the store. I need officers here immediately." The decision was made. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, their presence undeniable as they entered the store. Other customers turned their heads, their murmurs filling the air as they noticed the unusual scene unfolding. The officers approached Malcolm, their posture professional but firm. One of them spoke, his tone direct but not aggressive. "Sir, we need to have a word with you." Malcolm looked up from the item he was examining, his expression neutral but alert. He nodded, setting the item down carefully before turning to face them. Around him, the store grew quieter. Shoppers paused, employees stopped mid-task, and all eyes turned to the center of the unfolding drama. Linda stood at the counter, arms crossed, watching intently. Her smirk returned as she whispered to herself, "Finally, this will sort itself out." The officers approached Malcolm, their presence commanding the attention of everyone in the store. One officer stood slightly ahead of the other, his posture firm but not overtly aggressive. "Sir," the lead officer began, his tone even but unmistakably authoritative, "we received a report about some suspicious activity. Can we ask what you're doing here today?" Malcolm turned to face them fully, his expression calm but resolute. "I'm shopping," he replied simply, gesturing to the shelves around him. Before the officer could respond, Linda stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her expression a mix of satisfaction and indignation. "Shopping?" she scoffed, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "He's been wandering around for over 15 minutes, picking things up and putting them back down. If that's shopping, I'd love to see him pay for something." Malcolm's calm didn't falter. He looked directly at Linda, his voice steady. "Are you the store owner?" he asked. Linda's laugh was sharp, almost mocking. "The owner? No, but I don't need to be the owner to know what's happening here. You're causing trouble, and frankly, people like you don't have the means to be shopping in a place like this." The room seemed to grow quieter. A few customers who had been browsing nearby paused, their gazes darting between Malcolm and Linda. One woman, clutching a designer handbag, pulled out her phone and began recording. Another man, standing by the entrance, shook his head in disapproval. Malcolm didn't flinch at Linda's words. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With deliberate calm, he began dialing a number. "This is unacceptable," he said, not raising his voice, but ensuring that every word was clear. "Let me speak to the property manager immediately." Linda's laugh came again, this time louder. "The property manager?" she repeated, incredulity dripping from her words. "Good luck with that. I doubt someone like you even knows who they are, let alone has their number." The officers exchanged glances, their discomfort growing as they realized the tension wasn't just about suspicion anymore. It was something deeper, something far more revealing. As Malcolm spoke quietly into his phone, the murmurs among the other shoppers began to grow louder. "This is ridiculous," one woman said, stepping forward. "He's just shopping. You're profiling him because of his skin color." Linda turned sharply toward the woman, her face reddening. "Mind your own business," she snapped. "You don't know what's going on here." But it was clear that others did. Phones were now raised across the store, capturing every word, every moment. The weight of the situation shifted as the onlookers began to speak up. Meanwhile, Malcolm finished his call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He stood quietly, his composure unshaken, as he turned to the officers. "The property manager will be here shortly," he said simply. Linda's smirk faltered for the briefest of moments before she regained her composure. "Oh, I'm sure they will," she said sarcastically, "and I'm sure they'll be thrilled to deal with this mess." It was in that moment that a small detail shifted the energy in the room. Malcolm's gaze softened slightly, and for the first time he spoke directly to the crowd. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened to me," he said, his voice carrying a weight that drew the attention of even those at the back of the store. "But I've learned to deal with it differently now." For a brief moment, the audience was given a glimpse into Malcolm's past. Through flashes of imagery and quiet narration, his story unfolded. A young boy turned away from stores, a college student questioned for walking through an affluent neighborhood, a young professional facing unjust scrutiny despite his growing success. But those struggles had shaped him. They had fueled his ambition, driving him to build a career where he would never be underestimated again. And now, as a successful entrepreneur and philanthropist, Malcolm had the power to respond in ways that left a lasting impact. Back in the store, the tension was palpable as the crowd awaited what would happen next. Linda, now visibly uneasy, tried to maintain her air of authority. But the balance of power was no longer in her favor. "You think you know who I am," Malcolm said quietly, his words directed at Linda, "but you don't. And you're about to find out." It wasn't a threat, nor was it a boast. It was a simple, measured statement of fact. And as they all waited for the property manager to arrive, the weight of what was about to happen hung heavily in the air. Phones were still recording, voices were still murmuring, but all attention remained fixed on Malcolm, on the man who had turned an unjust confrontation into a moment that no one in that store would ever forget. The store had grown unusually quiet. The faint hum of music playing overhead and the occasional rustling of bags were the only sounds breaking the stillness. All eyes were on Malcolm, who stood composed, his gaze unwavering. The officers shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do next. Linda, still clutching her position of authority, glanced at the entrance as if expecting backup to arrive and affirm her assumptions. Minutes later, the tension broke with the sound of brisk footsteps echoing through the mall corridor. A man in a tailored suit appeared at the store entrance, his pace quick and his expression stern. Heads turned as he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Malcolm, the property manager. There was no hesitation in his stride as he approached Malcolm. He instantly shifted from authority to respect. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice calm but heavy with urgency, "I came as soon as I heard. Please accept my apologies for this situation." The room froze. Linda's confidence began to crack, her expression flickering between confusion and dawning realization. Her gaze darted between Malcolm and the property manager, searching for some kind of explanation that made sense. "Wait," Linda said, her voice wavering slightly as she stepped forward. "You know this man?" The property manager turned to her sharply, his face hardening. "Know him?" he echoed, his tone incredulous. "Mr. Bennett is the primary investor in this mall. He owns a majority of the property, including this store." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd of shoppers and employees. Linda's face drained of color as the truth hit her, the full scope of her mistake dawning on her in an instant. Malcolm stood still, his calm unshaken as he addressed the property manager. "I came here to shop," he began, his voice steady but carrying the force of his indignation. "What I didn't expect was to be profiled, disrespected, and humiliated in a space I help keep open." The property manager's expression darkened further. "Mr. Bennett, I can't tell you how sorry I am. This is unacceptable. What can we do to make this right?" Malcolm turned his attention back to Linda, who now looked visibly shaken. Her arms, once crossed in defiance, hung limply at her sides. Her smirk had vanished, replaced with a look of pure disbelief. "You didn't just disrespect me," Malcolm said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You disrespected yourself. You disrespected every person who walked into this store, and you disrespected the values that this mall is supposed to represent." Linda opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. She glanced at the property manager, seeking some kind of defense, but found none. "Effective immediately," Malcolm continued, his tone firm. "This store will undergo a complete review of its hiring practices, employee training, and customer interaction policies. And as for you," he fixed Linda with a sharp gaze, the weight of his authority unmistakable, "you will no longer represent this store or any other property under my name." The room seemed to exhale collectively. Linda's face crumpled, her earlier bravado completely gone. She stammered something incoherent before finally retreating, her steps unsteady as she left the room. The property manager, still standing beside Malcolm, nodded solemnly. "Consider it done, Mr. Bennett," he said. "And again, I apologize. We will make this right." Malcolm didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the store, his eyes meeting those of the onlookers who had witnessed the entire ordeal. Their phones were still raised, capturing every second. Malcolm's next words weren't for Linda, the property manager, or the store employees. They were for everyone watching. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. We all deserve respect. No one should have to prove their worth simply because of how they look." As Malcolm turned to leave, the room remained silent, the weight of what had just occurred settling over everyone present. The property manager followed closely behind, already making notes on the changes Malcolm had demanded, and as the door swung shut behind them, the story that unfolded that day began to spread. First among those in the mall, then through the videos uploaded to social media, and finally across the wider world, becoming a powerful example of accountability and justice in the face of prejudice. As the news of what had happened spread throughout the mall, the weight of the moment began to settle. Malcolm's actions didn't just end with Linda's termination or the confrontation in the store. They were the catalyst for something much larger. The video recordings taken by customers that day flooded social media. Within hours, the clips began to go viral, shared and reshared across platforms with captions like "Justice in Action" and "When the Tables Turn." Each video told the same story: a man quietly standing his ground in the face of blatant prejudice, and a store manager whose quick judgments led to an unforgettable lesson. The response was immediate. Comments poured in from around the world, with people expressing outrage, support, and solidarity. Many shared their own experiences with profiling in retail spaces, sparking a broader conversation about discrimination and the everyday challenges faced by marginalized communities. But Malcolm wasn't content to let the moment pass as just another viral story. For him, it was an opportunity to turn this experience into something meaningful, something lasting. The very next day, he announced a significant donation to several anti-discrimination organizations, each one focused on addressing systemic biases in workplaces and public spaces. In a press statement, Malcolm explained his decision. This isn't just about one store or one manager. It's about ensuring that every individual, no matter where they come from or how they look, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. He also worked closely with the mall's property management to implement new training programs for all employees. These programs emphasize diversity, equity, and inclusion, ensuring that the kind of behavior exhibited by Linda would never be tolerated again. The initiatives didn't stop there. Malcolm partnered with community leaders to develop educational workshops, inviting retail employees, managers, and even executives to participate. The focus wasn't just on preventing discrimination, but on creating environments where every customer felt valued and welcomed. For many, Malcolm's actions became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, there are ways to create meaningful change. His story was picked up by national news outlets, amplifying the conversation further. Interviews highlighted his journey, his success, and his commitment to making the world a better, fairer place. And as the world watched, the store itself faced its own reckoning. Customers boycotted in solidarity, calling for accountability and transparency from the brand as a whole. The company issued a public apology and announced plans to audit all its locations for similar issues, pledging to rebuild trust with the communities it served. For Malcolm, though, the resolution wasn't about the store or its reputation, it was about the impact. When asked during a televised interview what he hoped people would take away from the experience, he replied, "Change doesn't happen by waiting for the right moment. It happens when you stand up and make it happen. If my story inspires just one person to stand their ground, then it's worth it." Months later, the store reopened under new management, with a completely restructured team and revamped policies. Training sessions were mandatory for all employees, and the walls of the store displayed messages of inclusivity and respect. The ripples of that day extended far beyond the walls of the mall. For those who had been there, it was a moment they would never forget. For those who saw the video, it was a reminder of the power of accountability. And for Malcolm, it was another step in his lifelong journey to challenge the barriers that so many face every day. Justice wasn't just served, it was turned into action, into progress, into hope. And that, more than anything else, was the legacy of what began as an ordinary trip to the mall. Sometimes, it takes a single moment to shine a light on issues that have persisted for generations. What began as a routine shopping trip ended up becoming a powerful lesson, not just for one store, but for everyone who witnessed the incident, either in person or through the countless videos that followed. Malcolm later reflected on that day, not with anger, but with purpose. In a statement shared widely across media platforms, he said, "We're all human, and we all deserve dignity. It shouldn't matter where you come from, what you look like, or what you wear. Respect should never have conditions. Let's work toward creating a world where stories like this don't need to be told." His words resonated deeply. They reminded us that prejudice, no matter how subtle or overt, is a reflection of assumptions we make without understanding. Malcolm's response wasn't just about accountability. It was about paving a way forward, one where respect and equality are the standard, not the exception. As the video of the incident continued to spread, so did its message. People everywhere began having conversations about the everyday challenges faced by so many. Communities came together, businesses reassessed their policies, and individuals were inspired to challenge their own biases. But this story isn't just Malcolm's, it's ours to share. It's a reminder that even small actions can ripple outward to create real change. If you believe in standing against injustice, take a moment to share this story. Help raise awareness about the importance of treating everyone with respect, no matter their appearance. And if you want to see more stories that challenge assumptions and inspire change, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Together, we can spark the conversations that lead to a better, more inclusive future. Because in the end, change begins with us.